Good afternoon. I hope everybody has been enjoying Programmers Week, and especially our new edition this year, a dedicated day to product management. My name is Chuck Ferrando, and I'm a product management leader here at Cognizant Softvision, focused on the banking and financial services vertical. It is my privilege today to present a very special guest speaker, Teresa Torres. Teresa is a well-known and accomplished author, speaker, and product discovery coach. And I'm sure many of you have read or seen experts on social media posts of her recently released book, Continuous Discovery Habits. Today, Teresa is going to speak about the what and the why of continuous discovery. So our conversation today is probably going to go around 45 minutes. And so we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. So please post those in the chat as we go along here, and we will answer those at the end there. Again, thanks for attending today's talk. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Teresa Torres. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, so welcome everybody to the what and why of continuous discovery. As Chuck mentioned, I'm Teresa Torres. I like to share at the beginning of this talk that I've had the luxury of working with teams all over the world in a wide variety of contexts, from a founding team as small as 2 people to big multinational companies with hundreds of thousands of employees. And the reason why I like to share that is I know how easy it is to listen to a talk and think, oh, this framework or these tactics will work for other companies. And so I would just want to start with, odds are I've probably worked with a company like yours and with a team like yours. So I just want to encourage you to think about how you can flip that sort of default stance and think more about how might I bring some of this to my own team. All right, so with that out of the way, let's dive in. We're going to talk about discovery today. And I always like to just start at the very beginning and talk about discovery in contrast to delivery. This is how it's often defined. So we talk about discovery as representing the work that we're doing to decide what to build. And we often contrast that with delivery, which is the work we're doing to build, ship, and maintain a production quality product. Now, the reason why this distinction is becoming so important is a lot of companies traditionally have put a lot of emphasis on delivery, and we sometimes underestimate discovery, right? We end up focusing on, are we building things well? And we sometimes forget, are we building the right things? They're obviously both critically important. And we're seeing that as we start to evolve our language and adopt these terms, we're seeing more emphasis put on discovery. The other thing that we're starting to see is a shift from a project mindset to a more continuous mindset. This started on the delivery side. I'm guessing many of you are working in a continuous delivery or a continuous deployment environment, or you're on your way to getting there, right? We used to release once a year, once a quarter, and now we're seeing teams release multiple times a day, multiple times a week. If this cadence, as we talk about a continuous cadence, starts to feel overwhelming because your team's just not there yet, I will encourage you to think about this from a continuous improvement mindset and know that it's not about being perfect next week. It really is about how do we just get a little bit better week over week. So if you're still releasing only quarterly, that's okay. There's still going to be a lot that's really relevant to you here. So as we see this march towards a continuous cadence on the delivery side, we're seeing the same thing start to happen on the discovery side. We're recognizing that good discovery, so to make good decisions about what to build continuously, requires involving the customer. And so I want to start with just a really clear definition of continuous discovery. And then over the course of the talk, we're going to break the definition down. So this definition comes from my book, Continuous Discovery Habits. I define continuous discovery as, at a minimum, weekly touch points with customers by the team that's building the product. That's going to be a really critical line, where they're conducting small research activities in pursuit of a desired product outcome. Now, I know this is a mouthful. We're going to break it down. I'm going to start with just this first line, this weekly touch points with customers. And this is really where we're starting to adopt a continuous cadence. So this weekly cadence is really about, a lot of teams will do a whole bunch of customer interviews or run a whole bunch of experiments, and then they'll go weeks without talking to a customer. And so with a continuous cadence, we're looking at how do we spread that out? How do we adopt more of a continuous flow to our work? And the reason why this is so critical is that as product people, regardless of your role, whether you're a product manager, a designer, a software engineer, or any of the other supporting roles that contribute to building digital products, we're making decisions every day. Some of them are big strategic decisions, like which customer should we serve? What outcomes should we go after? What opportunities should we pursue? Others are more just everyday building decisions, like what do we label this button? How do we expose this feature in the interface? What should the underlying data model support? Now, most of us know that for those big strategic decisions, we need some research, and that's where we tend to see project-based research pop up in our organizations. What we're learning through experience is that even those daily decisions can benefit from customer feedback. I know we have a pretty big audience of engineers, and I'm sure all of you have had the experience where you're being asked to build something that's really hard to build because the data model doesn't support it, right? Or you give an estimate and then you run into trouble because you have to make a decision that increases the complexity of what we're building. And a lot of this is because we're having to make a lot of decisions before we have a full understanding of what our customers need, what we're really building. The other challenge here is for those of us that work on digital products full time. As we work on our products, we start to develop expertise about our products. We know how everything works. We know where everything lives in the interface. We know what's supported and what's not. We're building the product. Of course, we know all of that, right? The challenge is our customers don't have that same expert knowledge. And we start to fall prey to a cognitive bias called the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge says, as we develop expertise in a topic, we forget what it's like to not have that expertise. So as we make these daily decisions, we start to make them from our expert point of view, and they start to not work for our customers. The example that I like to give for this is I'm guessing most of you have a phone in arm's reach. If you pick up your phone and you just scroll through the pages and pages of apps, I'm guessing that every single one of you has dozens of apps that at one point you were excited about, and since then it stopped working for you. It either didn't meet your needs from the beginning, it didn't engage you over time. What we're seeing is a ton of products where the product teams are making daily decisions that don't work well for their customers, and they either don't win the customer in the first place or they don't engage them over time. The good news is there's a very easy way to solve this problem, and that's simply we just want to increase the frequency in which we engage with customers. I really recommend we do this on at least a weekly cadence. Again, if we're making decisions every day, if we only talk to a customer once a month, it means we're making a whole month of decisions without customer input. And that means we're going to go a whole month where the gap between how we think about the product and how our customer thinks about the product is going to widen. If instead we increase our frequency and we talk to customers more often, we start to see that gap. And most of us, once we see that gap, we're pretty motivated to overcome it, right? So this is just a really simple hack, if you will, to just, if you increase how often you talk to customers, you start to see how you're falling prey to the curse of knowledge. And most of us are motivated enough to overcome that. Now, there's a second benefit to this weekly cadence, and that's most of us, when we're doing research activities, we do what I call validation research. So there's two really common ways to do validation research. The one affects our design work. We tend to do all the design work up front, and then we validate with user testing at the end, did we get it right? On the delivery side, we tend to do all the delivery work, and then at the end, we validate with the A/B test, did we get it right? Validation research matters. We need to do both of those activities. The challenge with only doing validation research is that we're getting feedback really late in the process where it's very expensive to make changes, right? If we've done all the design work and we get feedback from our customer that this isn't quite right, we have to undo a lot of work. That's even more true on the delivery side. If we learn in the A/B test that our feature fell short of expectations, we've already done all the delivery work and we got to start over, or we got to pull out code and rebuild big chunks of it. When we start to adopt a weekly cadence to engaging with customers, we're going to get feedback on our half-baked ideas. We're going to get feedback on pencil sketches. We're going to get feedback before we're ready, and that's going to help us adopt what I call a co-creation mindset. This is where we're combining our knowledge of what's possible with technology with our customers' knowledge of their lives and their context and their needs. And together, we're going to co-create better solutions. We're going to get feedback earlier in the process when it's easier, cheaper, faster to act on it. Now, whenever I talk about co-creation, inevitably, somebody in the audience is thinking of one of two quotes. The first was by Steve Jobs, where he said, customers don't know what they want until we show it to them. And the second was allegedly by Henry Ford, where he said, if I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So I want to be really clear here. I'm not suggesting you go to your customers and say, what should we build? That's our job, right? We're the technologists. We know it's possible. It's our job to come up with the best solutions. What we're doing when we co-create with customers is we're learning about their lives. We're learning about their context. We're learning about their needs and their pain points and their desires so that we understand how our technology will be used, the environment in which it will be used, and what needs we want to satisfy. And we'll get into what this looks like a little bit in just a few minutes. Okay, so this first line of the definition is really about this weekly cadence. We're increasing the frequency in which we talk to customers so that we overcome the curse of knowledge, and we're getting feedback earlier when it's easier to act on. Now, the second line is that it's by the team building the product. So this is really important. Some companies hear about dual track agile and they interpret it as we have a discovery team that's separate from the delivery team. And I'm going to encourage you to not think that way. It really needs to be the same team. One of our goals when we shift from a waterfall mindset to an agile mindset is we're trying to reduce handoffs. We don't want a discovery team handing off to a delivery team. And we'll get into why. But I want to start with, who do I mean by the team? And this really, the heart of this idea is around a product trio. So a product trio is typically comprised of a product manager, a designer, and a software engineer. This can change a little bit based on the roles available to you at your company. It can also change based on the types of decisions that you're making. But here's the big idea. If discovery is about making decisions about what to build, we want the trio from the very beginning working together, making decisions about what to build. Now, I want to contrast this with what we've historically done. Historically, the product manager gathers requirements, works with stakeholders, maybe talks to customers, writes a big product requirements document. Maybe they write user stories, but they're still doing all the requirements writing on their own. It gets handed off to a designer who then tries to do all the design work. And then the requirements and the design get handed off to engineers to implement. What do we see with this model? Why does it fall apart? Two reasons. First of all, we see a lot of rework. Product manager hands off requirements. The designer runs into design constraints. We have to rewrite requirements, right? We eventually get to a design that we're happy with. We hand off requirements and design to engineers. And what do we run into? Technology constraints. We learn that things are going to take a lot longer than we thought. So we need to remove some scope. We learn that something as spec isn't possible. So we have to iterate on the requirements. And when we iterate on the requirements, we have to iterate on the design. We often have to unwrite code, right? We have to redo pieces that we've already done. So the first challenge with this waterfall model, even if and many agile teams are really just mini waterfall, right? The product manager is still writing requirements, the designer is still doing all the design work, and it's all getting handed off in a sprint. So the first challenge with this is we do a lot of rework. The second challenge with this is that it's like a game of telephone. The engineers who are building the product are far away from the customer. Maybe the product manager talked to a customer when writing requirements. More often, we see the product manager talking to business stakeholders who in turn are talking to customers. And then it gets handed off to designers, then it gets handed off to engineers. And we're 4 or 5 hops away from a customer. And what happens is that knowledge of the customer gets diluted. We lose context, we lose nuance. And what we're learning from experience is we want these 3 roles genuinely collaborating, right? We want them from the beginning making better decisions about what to build. And it's really hard to truly collaborate when an engineer has never talked to a customer. Because what happens? The trio is trying to make a decision about what to build. The engineer has an opinion, and the product manager, the designer, whoever talked to a customer last says, that's not what customers want. And now that trumps everybody else's opinion, and it's not a truly collaborative decision. So in order to have a well-functioning trio, we want the trio engaging with customers on a weekly basis. We want all 3 roles having firsthand exposure to the customer so that when it's time to talk about what should we build, we have equal access, equal knowledge. We're building a shared understanding. Now, I know this is different from how probably a lot of you work. And I know a lot of engineers that get a little bit afraid of this because they've never talked to customers. They're uncomfortable talking to customers. So here's what I'm going to say. If you've ever wondered, are we building the wrong thing? If you've ever had an opinion that like, hey, we could be doing a better version of this, that's what this trio is all about. We want to take advantage of engineers' expertise about what we can build and what's possible. And we need to make sure that engineers have the customer perspective in mind when they're contributing their expertise. So that's the big idea behind this trio. Now, most of us have more than 3 people on our team, right? We have additional engineers. Depending on your DevOps strategy, you might have QA folks, you might still have release managers on your team. Depending on how you interface with the rest of the organization, you might have data analysts or customer success folks or product marketing managers. Maybe you have the luxury of a user researcher who's embedded on your team. I'm not trying to exclude any roles. I get asked all the time, what about Scrum Masters? What about program managers? I'm not trying to leave anybody out here. We have a lot of diversity on our teams. The goal here is when you're making decisions, the more people involved in the decision, the slower it's going to go. So we're trading off speed of decision-making with quality of decision-making. And that's because with quality, we want the right roles represented given the type of decision that we're making. So we want to balance speed. We want the fewest people involved in each decision so we can go fast. But we also want the right cross-functional roles represented so we make a better decision. So this idea can flex based on the type of decision that you're making. If you're working on your go-to-market strategy, you're probably going to invite your product marketing manager to be part of that discovery work. If you have an embedded full-time user researcher, they might be part of your trio that becomes a quad. If you're working on your underlying data model and what analytics to track, you're probably going to invite your data analyst to be a part of those conversations. So don't think about this as a rigid concept. It really is fluid, but we're trading off speed of decision-making with quality of decision-making. Okay, so we've tackled these first 2 lines. We're really talking about weekly touch points with customers by that product trio, where they're consulting other members of the team based on the types of decisions that they're making. But at the heart of it, we have a product trio who's working together from the beginning, building a shared understanding so they can truly collaborate and make better decisions about what to build. So now we got to get into the second half. Okay, so we're talking to a customer every week. What are we doing when we talk to a customer? What does that look like? So our goal here is we're going to conduct small research activities. So we can't take our old project-based research methods and try to jam them into a weekly cadence. We're just going to burn ourselves out. And we're not doing research for research's sake. We're doing research to help us uncover the best path to our desired product outcome. So these last 2 lines are going to work together, right? Our goal is to be outcome focused and to do research to help us reach our outcome. Now I'm going to introduce a visual that I like to use with teams to help them stay focused on their outcome and to help them manage their research activities. It's called an opportunity solution tree. If this is the first time you're seeing this, we're going to walk through how it works. So it starts with just defining a clear outcome. Now, if you're new to outcomes, an outcome is a metric. It's something we can count, right? In this instance, when I'm talking about an outcome, we're going to start with business outcomes. Business outcomes derive from your business model. I'm going to use Netflix as my example simply because people around the world are broadly familiar with Netflix. So Netflix has a subscription model. Their business model is a subscriber model, right? So some of the metrics they care about are things like customer acquisition, customer retention, right? So if we take a metric like customer retention, you can imagine there's probably at least one team, if not many at Netflix, that are focused on increasing retention. Now we want to take that outcome and we want to translate it to a product outcome. So that was a business outcome. We want to translate it to a product outcome. A product outcome is a behavior that occurs in the product. And the reason why we want to do that is because product teams can directly influence what happens in the product. We can't always directly influence what happens outside the product. So we're going to take that business outcome and translate it. In order to do that, we need a theory. How is a product going to support the health of the business? So in this case, the product team might have a theory that if you watch Netflix more, you're going to be more likely to renew. And so to drive retention, we're going to focus on engagement, right? So that's an assumption that as we start to drive that outcome, we're going to have to test that assumption, but we're looking for a product outcome that will drive a business metric. This is really important because we need to make sure that we're creating value for the business so that we earn the right to serve our customers over time. Now, I want to contrast this with how many of you might be working. So historically, product teams have not been given an outcome. They've been given a roadmap. Build these features by this timeline. The reason why as an industry we're starting to move away from that is because a fixed roadmap assumes certainty, right? It assumes we can predict the future. If you started January 2020 with a fixed roadmap, my guess is by March of 2020, you had to throw the roadmap away and create a new one, right? Now, we're not going to face a global pandemic every year of our lives. Let's cross our fingers and hope that's true. But we do see rapid change in our industry all the time. We see new technology become possible. We see competitors disrupt our markets. We see even our own code changes change the way our customers behave. So the goal with starting with an outcome is to leave room for that uncertainty. It gives us the ability to explore and react, right? And so that's the key here is we're starting with an outcome. Once we have that in place, we now want to create customer value. So we don't want to just be business focused, right? We started with a business model metric. We also want to be customer focused. And so we're going to look for the customer opportunities that we think if we address them would drive our outcome. Now, opportunities is a little bit of jargon. It just represents customer needs, customer pain points, and customer desires. So you can think about it like problems, but generally we tackle more than just problems, right? We also we remove pain points, we address desires. So it's just a little more inclusive than a problem statement. And then once we uncover those opportunities, outputs do matter. We do need to discover the solutions that will address those opportunities in a way that will drive our outcome. Now, one of the values of this visual is it's helping us align customer value with business value. This is really important. At a lot of companies, these are at odds. So we're starting with business value because that's what's going to keep our team viable. That's what's going to make sure we earn the right to serve our customer over time. But we want to be customer centric. So we're going to dive into the opportunity space. And so we're going to use this visual to talk about what are the small research activities we're doing on a weekly basis to help us reach our outcome. We're going to talk about one activity to help us discover opportunities and another activity to help us evaluate solutions. Okay, so we are going to start at the top. We have to start by defining a clear outcome. I recommend this be a two-way negotiation between your product leader and your product trio. By product leader, I mean your chief product officer, your VP of product, maybe if you work at a really large company, the general manager of a business unit. Here's the key. The executive is bringing the across the business view and is communicating how your team can create value for the business. So in our Netflix example, maybe their chief product officer would communicate the way that you can create value for the business is to increase subscriber retention. The product team now needs to do the work to translate that to a product outcome. So we're looking for a behavior in the product that if we were to drive that behavior would in turn correlate with driving our business outcome. So in this case, again, our theory might be if you watch Netflix more, if we drive engagement, we're going to in turn drive retention. Once that outcome is in place, we're going to start our first weekly activity. We're going to interview to discover opportunities. Now, a lot of people think about customer interviewing as a way to evaluate solutions. I want to reframe that for you. We're interviewing to discover needs, pain points, and desires. So our goal in an interview is to help us understand the opportunity space. And because the opportunity space is always changing, we want to interview continuously. We're interviewing week over week. Again, that's going to help us overcome that curse of knowledge. It's going to help us react when things like COVID happen. It's going to help us react when new competitors enter the market. And really a deep understanding of the opportunity space is what's going to help differentiate our product from our competitors. Now, the reason why most teams don't interview every week is because recruiting is genuinely hard. It's hard to find someone to talk to every week. So what I recommend teams start with is automating the recruiting process. And I mean fully automating this process. I want you to wake up on Monday morning, look at your calendar and see that you already have an interview booked without you having to do a single thing. This sounds magical. I've worked with hundreds of teams who have successfully done this. I'm going to share the 3 most common strategies. The first is to recruit people while they're using your product or service. So this works extremely well for B2C products and to recruit B2B end users. So these are people that are already visiting and using your product in the course of their lives. And while you already have their attention, you can use a pop-up, you can use an interstitial, you can embed it somewhere on the page, whatever makes most sense for your product or service. The key idea is ask them to participate in an interview while you already have their attention. If they say yes, you then use scheduling software to let them select a time on your calendar. So you're cutting out all the back and forth of when are you available. Now, if you implement this, it's not going to just magically work. You have to treat this like any other product funnel. You're going to have to experiment with where do you show it? Who do you show it to? How often do you show it? How much time do you ask for? What do you offer as an incentive or reward? Who do you ask? How do you word the copy? It will take a little bit of experimentation. The upside, though, is once you get it right, it will be very easy to do an interview every week because they're just going to automatically get added to your calendar. Now, like I said, this works very well for B2C products, and it works very well to recruit B2B end users. If you're trying to recruit B2B buyers or decision makers, I'm going to give you a second strategy. These folks are not living within your product, so we're going to use your customer-facing teams. These are the people that are already on the phone with your decision makers all day, every day. It could be your sales team. It could be their account managers. It could be your customer success team. Odds are, if you're a B2B company, you have folks that are on the phone with your decision makers all day, every day. Instead of using our product to recruit, we're going to use those teams to recruit. We can define triggers. We can say, if you're talking to a customer who's experiencing this pain point, ask them to participate in an interview. Same idea. Use scheduling software so that you don't have to be involved at all. It just shows up on your calendar. I will share the vast majority of teams that I've worked with are using one of these two strategies. For the vast majority of you, this is where you want to start. I am going to introduce a third strategy, but I'm going to caveat it. This strategy has some major limitations. However, if you fall into one of 2 categories, it might be your best strategy. So if your total addressable market is teeny tiny, I'm going to give you 2 examples. I worked with a company where their total addressable market was 6 companies. 6. Not they only had 6 customers, their total addressable market was only 6 customers. That's because they worked with large movie studios based in the United States. There are 6 of them, right? Another example, I worked with a company where their total addressable market was Canadian medical schools. There might be a dozen of them, maybe 2 dozen, I'm not quite sure, but it's a small market. So that's one instance where this third strategy is going to be helpful. The second instance is if you're working with an audience, it's extremely hard to reach. We all think our audience is hard to reach, so I'm going to give you some examples. We're talking about Fortune 500 CEOs. We're talking about respiratory ICU physicians and nurses during the height of COVID. People with very little discretionary time. In both of these instances, it can be beneficial to set up a customer advisory board where you're building a long-term relationship with a small number of customers. The reason why I'm caveating this strategy, if you have a big total addressable market or your customers are not that hard to reach, the risk of using this strategy is you're only going to be talking to a small number of customers and you're going to build a product that works for a subset of the market and not the entire market. However, there are some very hard to reach instances where this will be the right strategy. If you do use this strategy, I don't want you to work with your advisory board as a focus group. Instead, you're inviting your advisory board members to do one-on-one interviews with your teams on a regular basis. You will have to incentivize them. It'll have to be an ongoing incentive, but this is a way to help reach some of those harder to reach folks. Some people call this design partners. Some people call it a customer advisory board. The idea is you're building a long-term relationship with people that are hard to reach. Okay, once you have a customer in the room, we need to talk about how to ask the right questions. And the key to interviewing well is to avoid speculation. Now, this sounds simple, but it's hard to do in practice. I'm going to keep with my Netflix example. We're going to talk about, let's imagine that I wanted to know, what do you like to watch? How do you decide what to watch? Who do you watch with? What device do you watch on? How often do you watch? These are all really good research questions. But if I ask you these questions, your answers are not likely to be reliable. What do I mean by reliable? They're not necessarily going to reflect your actual behavior. And it's not because you're trying to be deceptive. It's because humans, all of us, rarely reflect on our own behavior. So when we're asked direct questions out of context, we speculate. Our brains, because of cognitive biases, give us fast answers, but those fast answers aren't necessarily reliable. So what we want to do to fix this is we want to ground our interviews in the context of specific stories. So all those who, what, why, how questions are speculative questions. You might have heard on the internet to ask open-ended questions. That's true, but it's not enough. So I could say, tell me about your experience on Netflix. That's nice and open-ended, but it's speculative. Instead, I want to collect a specific story. Tell me about the last time you watched Netflix. We're going to keep you grounded in a specific instance. Your memory for a specific instance, as long as it's recent, should be fairly reliable. And I can listen for answers to all my who, what, why questions. Where were you? Who were you with? What device were you on? How did you decide what to watch? What did you watch? All of those answers will get pulled out of the story. So I'll still learn what I'm trying to learn. Reliability will go way up. And another benefit of interviewing based on stories is we get context, we get nuance, and opportunities start to emerge. We hear needs, we hear pain points, we hear desires. So this really is the key to understanding the opportunity space, is we want to collect customer stories. So we start to learn what's the environment in which our product lives, what are the needs that we can address, what are the pain points, what are the desires, who's involved, what's the ecosystem look like. That's the goal with interviewing. Now, as we interview, we're going to hear dozens and dozens of opportunities. This visual that you're looking at is the simplest version of a tree you will ever see. In reality, it's going to be broad, it's going to be deep, it's going to be messy. You're going to have to play with how to structure the opportunities. You're going to, as a team, debate on what did we really hear? Did it mean this? Did it mean that? That's a big part of the discovery process, is really understanding what did we hear from our customers. In that process, you're going to assess and prioritize the opportunities that you heard. And I want to encourage you to work with one opportunity at a time. This is what's going to allow you to fully satisfy a need. Whereas what a lot of teams do is we partially satisfy a lot of needs and we end up with mediocre products. Great products address fewer opportunities, knowing that with time, they'll get to address more, but they fully satisfy the opportunities. And one way to do that is once you choose a target opportunity, I want you to work with a set of solutions. So we're going to work with 3 ideas that each have the potential of addressing our target opportunity. Now I want to contrast this with what a lot of teams do. We talk to a customer, we hear a customer need. We immediately jump to our first solution and we start building or we start testing. And what's wrong with this, when we work with one idea at a time, we're asking what decision-making researchers call a whether or not decision. And the problem with whether or not decisions is that they exacerbate 2 different cognitive biases. The first is the escalation of commitment. The more we invest in an idea, the more we fall in love with it. The more we fall in love with an idea, the more we exacerbate confirmation bias. Confirmation bias says we're going to see all the evidence that suggests our idea is fantastic, and we're likely to miss the evidence that suggests our idea is flawed. Now, the good news, there's a very easy way to fix this, and that's simply to set up a good compare and contrast decision. So we're going to work with 3 different ideas, and instead of saying, is my idea good or not, we're going to say which of these ideas looks most promising. If you've ever gotten qualitative feedback on a prototype and you were wondering, is it good enough or not, you need to be comparing and contrasting. If you've ever ran a quantitative test and you got a conversion rate and you wondered, is this conversion rate good enough? It's because you're not comparing and contrasting. So when we work with 3 ideas at a time, it's a lot easier to compare and contrast and to understand what we're learning from our experiments. This is an important enough idea that I'm going to give you a visual to help you remember it. So this is Usain Bolt. He was once the world's fastest 100-meter runner. If you saw him running around a track and I asked you, is he fast? I want you to hear a whether or not question and ask, is he fast relative to what? Is he fast relative to a cheetah? Probably not. Is he fast relative to a Tesla? In the first 100 meters, I would pay to see that race. Is he fast relative to other humans? Absolutely. So what we're seeing in the photo on the right is a compare and contrast decision where we have a clear front runner. When we experiment, when we evaluate solutions, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for a clear front runner. Now, the reason why most teams don't do this is because we're still using big project-based research to evaluate our solutions. We're prototyping the whole solution and usability testing at the end. We're building the whole solution and we're A/B testing at the end to evaluate impact. We do want a usability test. We do want to A/B test to measure impact, but much earlier than that, we need different research methods to quickly evaluate sets of solutions. And the key to this, you'll see in a minute, we're going to change our research methods to make them more smaller, more sustainable, more continuous. So I'm going to return to my Netflix example to walk through this. I want you to imagine we interviewed a bunch of Netflix users and they said, Netflix is pretty good at TV shows and movies, but I really want to watch live sports. So we identify this opportunity. I want to watch live sports. We know we should generate 3 good solutions, not sham options, 3 good solutions. So we come up with these 3 solutions. The first is, here in the United States, a lot of our sporting events are on our local public channels, ABC, CBS, and NBC. So the first potential solution is Netflix could partner with those channels and integrate a live feed into Netflix. Second potential solution, they could say, we already partner with movie studios to license movies. Let's partner with sports leagues and license games. So here in the US, they might partner with Major League Baseball. In Europe, they might partner with the Premier League, etc. And they're going to put games directly in the interface. Third solution might be, we're Netflix, we're not very good at sports. Let's just find somebody who is and partner with them. So Fubo TV is a streaming service. They've already partnered with a lot of the TV channels that show sports. Netflix could say, let's just bundle Fubo TV with a Netflix subscription. Okay, we have 3 good ideas for our target opportunity. We want to set up a good compare and contrast decision. We can't do big, large-scale project-based validation research for all 3 ideas. The key is to take our ideas and break them down into their underlying assumptions. Now, the reason why we don't do this, even though this is an old idea, Eric Ries introduced it over 10 years ago in the Lean Startup, is because it's hard to see our own assumptions. So I'm going to give you 5 categories of assumptions to help you generate assumptions. And then I'm going to give you another tactic for how to quickly generate even more. So assumptions tend to fall into 5 categories. You might have seen this Venn diagram that covers 3 of them. It's pretty common in the product world. We talk about building desirable products. Does anybody want it? As a team, we're also making a number of desirability assumptions about why we think our customers want it and what they're willing to do. We're also making viability assumptions. Is it good for our business? Why do we think that? What are the assumptions that we're making? If we're an outcome-focused team, it's as simple as why do we think this will drive our outcome? We're making feasibility assumptions. It's possible we can build it. We have the necessary skills. The technology is possible. I'm going to add 2 more categories. The 4th is usability assumptions. Can we make it easy to use? Can customers find it? Do they understand what they need to do? Are they able to do what we need them to do? And the last category is ethical assumptions. Is there any potential harm in building this solution? This is where we want to look at things like our data policies. What data are we collecting? Can we store it effectively? Who are we selling it to? Are they using it ethically? We can also look at social equity and inclusion issues here. Who are we choosing to serve implicitly or explicitly? Who are we leaving out? Knowing these 5 categories will help you generate assumptions, but we still tend to be blind to our own assumptions. So I'm going to give you another strategy. We can use story mapping to help us generate assumptions. If you're new to story mapping, it's the yellow boxes on this slide. I'm going to walk you through it. The first thing I want you to do is assume your solution already exists. So we're fast forwarding into the future. Your solution already exists. And we're mapping out what does our customer need to do in order to get value from this solution. So in this case, they have to decide they want to watch a sporting event. They have to choose a streaming service. They have to open it. They have to choose a local channel because this is our ABC, NBC, CBS solution. And then they have to watch the game. Now, the value of this is I can now go step by step through my story map and say, what needs to be true in order for my customer to do each step? That's what I'm doing with the gray boxes below. This is how I'm generating assumptions. So what needs to be true? My subscriber needs to be a sports fan. They need to know that Netflix has sports. They have to want to watch sports on Netflix. We have to be able to partner with ABC, CBS, and NBC. We have to build a partner in a way that works for the business. They have to know what channel the game is on. We have to be able to create a good live sports streaming experience, right? So I can quickly generate assumptions. Now, the value of this is that assumption testing is much faster than idea testing, and assumptions are going to help us differentiate our ideas. Some assumptions will be unique to each idea, and if we rapidly test those, that's going to give us the compare and contrast data we need to make a good decision. So I'm going to quickly, because we're running out of time, give you 4 strategies for how to rapidly test assumptions. We're going to work with this first assumption of our subscribers want to watch sports. The first thing I can do is I can prototype to simulate a specific moment. I want to emphasize we're not prototyping the whole idea. We're not doing pixel perfect production quality design. We're taking just the moment in the story map where the assumption occurred. We're prototyping to simulate that moment. So in this case, all I have to do is prototype the moment where you're deciding what to watch. So I can just give you a list of options and some TV shows, some movies, some sporting events, and say, what would you like to watch right now? If I have access to an unmoderated testing tool, I can create and test this mockup in less than a day. It's a very rapid way to get feedback on an assumption. The second way I can test this assumption is with a quick 1-question survey. The key with the 1-question survey is it lives within your product or service. So you're getting data while you have your customer's attention. And it literally is 1 question. So it's dead simple for them to fill out. You can rapidly collect a lot of responses. In this case, we're just going to ask, have you watched a sporting event in the past week? Now, with surveys, we need to be careful about how we frame our questions. Just like with interviewing, we want to avoid speculative questions and ground our questions about specific instances in the past. So we're not saying, do you watch sports? That's speculative. We're asking, have you watched a sporting event in the last week? Most teams can collect enough survey responses to get a signal in a few hours or a day or 2 at most. Third way we can test this assumption is to ask, are our customers already exhibiting the behavior we would expect to see if this assumption were true? So what data can we look at? We can look at support tickets. We can look at behavioral analytics. We can talk to our sales teams. We can look at our search queries. In this case, for Netflix, they might ask, are customers already searching for sports? Let's go look at our search queries and see if we have any evidence that suggests we already have sports fans in our audience. Okay, these 3 strategies are going to be really effective. Prototyping a specific moment, running a 1-question survey, data mining to look for evidence, is your assumption true or not? There's a 4th strategy that I'm going to give you that's going to work really well for your feasibility assumptions. Now, I know we have a lot of engineers in the audience. You're probably already familiar with this idea of a research spike, where you're given a time-boxed amount of time to go investigate something. Usually when we ask our engineers to do a research spike, we give them an open-ended, too big of a problem. Go look at what it would take to implement this. That's too broad. We want to be testing a very specific feasibility assumption. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's imagine that you're going to integrate NBC, one of our local channels, a live feed into Netflix. And one of your concerns is that NBC can't provide enough metadata. You want to be able to show in the Netflix interface a title, a description, an image, right? We're going to tell our engineers, spend the next day or 2 pulling 24 hours of events from the NBC feed and evaluate how often you're getting appropriate metadata. What does this do? It gives us compare and contrast data. How easy or difficult is it going to be to implement this idea? And it helps make more of the delivery known. So when it's time to estimate, we're going to have better estimates. Okay, we just covered a lot of ground very quickly. So I'm going to give you a quick recap. We started at the very top of this diagram talking about defining a clear outcome. Remember, we're looking at a product outcome, measuring a behavior in our product that we believe will directly correlate with driving a business outcome. Once that's in place, we're going to start interviewing every week. We're interviewing on a continuous cadence to overcome the curse of knowledge. And because the opportunity space is always shifting, right? So we're interviewing to discover opportunities, that's customer needs, pain points, and desires. The second small research activity we're doing on a continuous basis is we're assumption testing. We're assumption testing to quickly collect data about our set of solutions so that we can set up a good compare and contrast decision. And we're constantly iterating until we find solutions that we believe we can build. We're building them, we're moving on to the next opportunity. As we build, we're remembering to measure impact so we can evaluate, did we fully satisfy that opportunity? If we didn't, we need to return to it and keep working. If we did, we get to move on to the next opportunity. Over time, as we address the opportunity space, we start to move the outcome. Now, I know we covered a lot and we did it really quickly, so I will share that everything that we covered today is covered in detail in my book, Continuous Discovery Habits. I know that a lot of books are written really high level. A big criticism of business books is that they really could be 50 pages and they're 300 pages. I will share, I wrote this book to be a hands-on practical guide for product trios who want to put these habits into practice. It really is designed to be a how-to guide. So if you're interested in working this way, if you're interested in helping your team move in this direction, I do recommend picking up a copy. It's available at bookstores around the world. All right, Chuck, I think we're ready for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Both questions come from us. The initial questions come from us around the user interviews, because I think that is a pretty interesting area to the people on this talk here, because we don't always get to talk to end users. So the first question is, how do you handle sort of product leaders or general managers that do not let the product trio or the product teams, get in touch with users?
Yeah, there's a couple levels of this. So the first thing I'm going to say, you're an individual contributor, you're on a product trio. Maybe your product manager or your designer doesn't want you talking to the customers. Maybe it's your CTO or your CPO, doesn't matter who it is. Here's what I'm going to tell you. You probably have friends in your organization that are talking to customers on a regular basis. Make a friend. Make a friend on your sales team. Make a friend on your account management team. Make a friend on your support team, right? Just ask to sit in on their meetings. So here's the idea behind this. We're going to take a continuous improvement mindset. I want you to start teeny tiny. What's something you can do tomorrow, right? So if you have a friend in the organization that already talks to customers, go observe their call. That got you a little closer to a customer than you've already been. Right. From there, start talking with your immediate team. Hey, I observed this. Here's what I learned. Do you guys want to come to the next one? Right? From there, ask if you can ask a question at the end. Hey, can I ask my own question in the last 5 minutes? Here's the key. Most humans are afraid of the unknown, and we got to pull down the unknowns. We got to make them known, right? So when we get resistance, it's people are afraid. They think something bad's going to happen. So you got to start teeny tiny to remove that fear and then iterate from there. But all of us have the ability to get in front of a customer, whether that's through a friend in the organization or we have someone in our personal network that's like a customer. Just find a teeny tiny place to start.
Awesome, thanks. And the second question here also around interviewing, and you kind of touched on this a little bit in your third example. How do you handle products that haven't been launched yet and have no consumer base, or products with a limited user base, like potentially an admin portal?
Yeah, this is a really great question. So let's say you're a startup and you don't even have a product yet. How do you find people to interview? I look at this two ways. You want to pull people to you, and you want to go to where people are. So with the pulling people to you, you can launch a landing page. You don't have to know what your product is. I'll give you an example. Let's say that I'm going to be a startup founder. I want to serve podcasters and I want to help them grow their audience. But I don't know what product I'm going to build. I just know that I want to serve podcasters and I want to help them grow their audience. With just that information, I can launch a landing page that speaks to podcasters about the pain point of finding podcast listeners. And I can use advertising to try to target podcasters, pull people to my landing page, and ask them if they're willing to participate in an interview. Now, in order for that to work, I'm probably going to have to incentivize them. I'm probably going to have to spend a little bit on ads, but it's not that hard. This is a classic demand test. And you can use the demand test to also find interview participants. The other thing I can do is I can go to where they are. Where do podcasters hang out? Do they have groups on Facebook or LinkedIn? Or do they hang out on, is there a Reddit subgroup? Or are there questions on Quora that I can go learn from? Here's what you don't want to do. Don't on day one join a subreddit group and post, can I interview you? First, be a part of the community, learn from them in their own environment, build relationships, and then interview people.
Excellent. Third question here is with B2C. I think one concern with automating feedback is the risk that people who sign up are just looking for the incentive. Has this concern been brought up before, and how do you address that concern? How do you weed out the real feedback versus people just kind of getting the reward?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot. And the first thing I'm going to share is this does not happen as often as people think. It is actually really rare. If you are recruiting from within your own product, they're already a customer. If they're opting in, it's because your product is serving a role in their life and they want to talk to you about it. So as long as you're recruiting on your own product, this is not going to happen very often. Now, when we talk about recruiting on these like interview platforms or testing platforms, things like user interviews or usertesting.com, now that becomes a little bit more of a concern. It's still rare, but it does become a little bit more of a concern because you've got folks that are just full-time being user testers or full-time joining these interviews. But if you're recruiting within your own product or service, you're going to see it a lot less often. You can also counteract it both in your own product and on those third-party tools with really good screeners. So a screener is just a survey they fill out before they participate in an interview, and you can look for the questions that distinguish, is this really the right person we want to be talking to?
Great, thanks. And then the last question here, and this one again is from a Softvisioner, so it kind of speaks to our model here. So at Softvision, we are big believers in similar models to your trio. We often bring technologists, designers, and product managers all at the table at the same time, and they eventually form the delivery pod. Our question asker is curious, do business leaders have any resistance to this approach in your experience? Imagine it might be radical to some.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's really unfortunate. Here's the reality. Business culture has evolved such that we work in silos. We're used to this top-down command and control. You do your part, I'll do my part. We'll get together and plug the pieces together. But we're learning that just doesn't work, and it especially doesn't work in a very complex world of digital software, right? Software is complex, and getting all the pieces right really does require cross-functional collaboration. A lot of business folks, and even a lot of us product people, right, haven't experienced this. And so again, it's a little bit of this fear of the unknown. Ooh, I've never worked that way. Is this going to work? Why would we do that? But we're learning from experience that it really does lead to better outcomes. And so if you're facing resistance to this in your own organization, I'm going to sound like a broken record. Start teeny tiny. Maybe experiment with one team and show that it can work. Or if you're just an individual contributor and that's not within your ability, just build stronger relationships with your trio peers. Even if you're not working as a trio, collaborate with each other more. Invite someone to give you feedback on something. Invite them to be part of your decision-making process, and then see if they'll reciprocate. So there's a lot that we can do as individual contributors without worrying about the messiness of our organizational context.
Awesome. And then we got one last here. I think the last one was more of a statement than a question, so I appreciate it. Getting positive feedback on all the responses here. So great, Teresa. I don't know if there's any other points that you wanted to touch on, but we're butting up against time here. But we appreciate your insight here. And like I said, everybody should go out and read this book if they haven't already.
Yeah, I'll just say thanks for having me, and thanks for all the really good questions. The other thing that I will share is that if you do pick up a copy of the book and you're really interested in learning more or with help putting it into practice, I'm very accessible on social media, both Twitter and LinkedIn. Happy to continue to answer questions. And we have a lot of resources to help you put the habits into practice, from a membership program to online courses, tons of blog posts. So if you have a question, odds are we have a resource to help you with it. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.